I sat down at the kitchen table with my coffee still steaming when my phone buzzed. The notification was from my credit union, a large withdrawal alert I had set up years ago as a formality. The kind of thing you configure and forget. Except the number attached to it was not small, and the account it referenced was not a formality. It was everything. $81,400, the result of 4 years of 6-day weeks, skipped conferences, and a standing lunch order of whatever was fast and cheap near the clinic. Gone. Transferred out before 7, on a Saturday morning while I was still in the guest room of the inn where my brother's wedding reception had ended 6 hours earlier. I set the mug down. I read the number twice. I looked out the window at the inn's back garden, still strung with lights from the night before. And I thought, so this is how it happens. My name is Renata. I'm 34 years old. I'm a licensed occupational therapist with a specialty in post-surgical rehabilitation, and for 4 years I had been building toward one specific number. $81,000 was my down payment on a duplex in a neighborhood called Creston Park, a 2-unit building where I would live in one half and rent the other. It was not a fantasy. I had toured it twice. I had the inspection report. I had a folder on my desktop labeled CR Duplex Final that contained 17 documents. It was the kind of plan that only works if nothing touches the money. To understand what happened, you need to understand my family's particular architecture. My mother, Vivienne, is a woman who has made an art form of strategic helplessness. She is not cruel in an obvious way. She is the kind of person who asks for your help as though she is doing you a favor by needing you. My father, Bernard, is quieter, not gentle, just economical. He lets my mother open the door and then walks through it. My brother, Theo, is 4 years younger than me, and has never in his adult life been asked to fix anything. That was always my assignment. I was the one who understood the lease renewals. I was the one who researched the refinancing options. When my parents needed to navigate anything with a form attached to it, they called me. I am good at systems. I understand how institutions work, how documentation functions, how to read the fine print that most people skip. This made me and my family's economy extraordinarily useful. The asks had grown over the years. A loan for a transmission repair that was repaid once, then forgotten as a model. A co-signature on a rental application. A check written for a cousin's tuition shortfall with the understanding that it was temporary. I had pulled back gradually, without drama, just shorter answers, slower responses, a consistent and quiet no that eventually reshaped expectations. I thought we had arrived at a workable distance. I was wrong about the distance. Theo's wedding was in the Hudson Valley, 3 days at a converted farmhouse that his fiancée's family had rented for the occasion. I was the person who helped coordinate the shuttle schedule and manage the vendor timeline the week before because that was how things went. On the Thursday evening before the ceremony, my mother found me in the hallway near the reception room and said she needed to ask me something practical. She explained that there had been a timing issue with a wire transfer connected to the venue's final payment, a miscommunication between the event coordinator and her bank that had left their primary account temporarily flagged. She needed to move some funds over the weekend for a few vendor balances. She asked if she could have temporary access to my account, just as a conduit. She said she had arranged something similar with the account of the family friend who was managing part of the gift fund. She said it would be a weekend at most. I want to be precise about this moment. I noticed something. There was a version of me that understood what was being asked in a way that went beyond the words. But my mother was standing in a hallway in a blue-gray cardigan looking genuinely tired, and it was the night before my brother's wedding, and I told myself I was calculating risk where there was none. I added her to the account. It took less than 10 minutes. She took my phone to enter the confirmation code herself, because I was holding a clipboard. I did not think about that detail until later. By Saturday morning, the account contained nothing. I stayed in the guest room for 40 minutes. I did not cry. I want to be specific about that, not because composure signals strength, but because what I felt was not grief. It was recognition. Something had been confirmed that I had been refusing to name for a long time. I called the credit union. The representative confirmed that the transfer had been executed through authorized joint access and that a fraud investigation could be initiated. I took the case number. I wrote it on the notepad on the nightstand. Then I got dressed and went downstairs to the post-wedding breakfast that had been arranged in the farmhouse dining room. My mother was at the center of the table when I arrived. She looked rested. I sat down, ate something I could not afterward identify, and waited for a natural lull. When the conversation around us broke into smaller threads, I looked at her and said quietly that I needed to discuss my account. She picked up her coffee before she answered. She said she had been planning to call me later that day. I said I assumed she had. She set the cup down and began to explain in the low, calibrated voice she uses when she has already decided where the conversation ends and is simply managing the distance to get there. My father had made some commitments, she said. Financial commitments to people he knew through a business group he'd been part of for several years. He had borrowed from them, she used that word precisely, and the situation had become time-sensitive. The money from my account was going to allow them to stabilize things before the end of the month. I said, "You took my property deposit to cover his debts." She said, "Renata, you're young. You earn well. You'll rebuild it." The table felt very far away suddenly. I thought about the inspection report in the folder on my desktop. I thought about the tenant unit and the spreadsheet I had made projecting 3 years of mortgage offsets. I thought about how thoroughly I had believed I was past the reach of exactly this. I said, "I understand." And then I excused myself, walked through the farmhouse entry, sat in my car in the gravel lot, and spent the next 2.5 hours on my phone. I found a lawyer through a professional referral network, a woman named Claudine who handled civil fraud and asset recovery. I left a complete message. Then I called the credit union again and escalated to their fraud division. Then I made a list. By the time I drove home Sunday afternoon, I had a Tuesday consultation, a formal case number, and a printed record of 6 months of statements folded into a legal envelope in my bag. I had also sent my brother a text telling him the wedding had been beautiful, because it had been, and because none of it was his doing. Claudine was methodical in the way of someone who no longer needed to perform certainty, she simply had it. What she uncovered over the following 3 weeks went further than I had known. My father had been collecting informal investments from 8 people over 5 years, presenting them as participation stakes in a property development fund that was largely notional. Some of those investors were professional contacts. One was my mother's brother, who had stayed quiet out of embarrassment. My mother had known the shape of it, if not every detail. My account had not been accessed out of panic. It had been accessed because I was, in the family's internal logic, the next available source. The fraud case moved on 2 tracks: the civil suit Claudine filed, and a separate criminal inquiry initiated by 2 of my father's investors. The bank's investigation supported Claudine's position, joint access obtained through misrepresentation. My mother had told me the access was for vendor logistics. That framing was documented. It held. My mother called 11 times in the first 2 weeks. I let all of them go. The messages ranged from accusatory to sorrowful, and the sorrowful ones were harder, because loving someone and understanding what they are capable of are not mutually exclusive, and the gap between those 2 things is where most of the actual pain lives. My father called once. He said he was sorry I was going through this. He never said what he had done. Those are different sentences. My sister-in-law called in the 3rd week. I hadn't expected that. She said, "Renata, I have to tell you. Your mother approached me before the wedding about account access. I told her my accounts were joint with Theo and I couldn't do it alone. I kept delaying. I should have warned you. I'm so sorry." That was when I sat down on the floor of my office and stayed there for a while. Not the empty balance, not my mother's voice in the dining room telling me I was young and would recover. This, the knowledge that someone close to me had already seen the shape of it and had quietly stepped aside and had not said a word to me. She and Theo came to stay with me the following month. We ate delivery food at my kitchen table, and she told me everything she had noticed over 2 years of being adjacent to my family. She gave me names and dates and a description of a document she had glimpsed once in my father's home office. It was useful. Claudine found it useful. The civil case settled out of court. Full repayment of $81,400 plus fees, structured over 22 months, secured by a lien. My parents retained the house from my case. The criminal proceedings were a separate matter. My father entered a plea arrangement involving supervised probation, mandatory restitution to all affected parties, and a 10-year restriction on financial solicitation. My mother received a civil judgment and a probationary term for her role in the transfer. I gave one statement to the district attorney's office. Claudine handled the rest. The first installment landed in my account on a Wednesday morning in March. I was between patients when the notification arrived. I looked at it, pocketed my phone, and went back to the clinic. The property in Creston Park sold before I had the full amount back. I drove past it once on a detour I told myself was incidental. There was a child's bicycle on the front porch and a window box with something growing in it. I sat with the engine running for a moment. Then I drove home and I found I was less sad than I had expected to be. What I had wanted was never quite that building. It was the condition that building represented. Something that was mine in a way that couldn't be reached by someone standing in a hallway asking a practical question. I found a different property 6 weeks later, a single-family house with better bones and a deep backyard and a front door that I had painted a dark particular shade of blue. I moved in on a Sunday in May with Theo, his wife, and 2 friends from the clinic. My parents were not there. That was deliberate. People ask me sometimes whether I regret taking legal action against my own family. I understand the question. I've sat with it. Here is what I know. My father built a system designed to extract from people he was supposed to protect. When it became unsustainable, he used my mother to reach into my savings through a door I opened because it was my brother's wedding, and I convinced myself my alarm was paranoia. That required planning. It required a specific belief about who I was and what I would do. That I was the kind of person who absorbs and continues. I was supposed to be a resource that didn't run out. Loving my parents and understanding what they chose to do are not things I need to reconcile into a single clean feeling. I'm still working on it. That work is mine and I'm doing it on my own schedule, and it doesn't require me to reframe what happened as anything other than what it was. Theo and his wife came for Thanksgiving. We cooked together in my kitchen, which has very good light in the afternoon. She brought a small plant, something she said was difficult to kill, and I put it on the sill above the sink. We talked around our parents for a while and then we talked about them directly and then we cleaned up and it was enough. I still take the early shifts at the clinic sometimes. I like the building before the day fills in. I like the particular work of helping someone recover a function they believed they had lost, watching it return in increments that are real and documented. No one can reach into that through a banking app at 7 a.m. Here is the thing I keep returning to. The door I chose is not the door I had originally planned. It is a different door in a different place and it belongs to a version of me. I think that version is more honest. If you're reading this and something in it feels familiar, the family that treats your stability as a communal fund, the guilt extended to you before you were old enough to examine it, the moment you realize the people who were supposed to shelter you had already decided you were the one available to save, then I want you to hear this. Holding on to what is yours is not abandonment. It is not coldness. It is not a betrayal of love. It is the only way the love means anything at all. What I want to ask you is this. When did you first understand that protecting yourself and protecting the people you love from consequences were 2 different things, and what did you do with that understanding?